was talking about civil rights. Now, keep in mind, the civil rights movement was designed to start a civil war. That was the purpose of it. First, they subjugated the blacks in America, starting after 1700s. It was a long 100-year plan or more. This is what I'm telling you is correct. Right after the Revolutionary War, here we go, rabbit hole notebook time. After the Revolutionary War, after Thomas Jefferson was pulled over to Adam Weishaupt and against America, a lot of things changed after the Revolutionary War. They set forth to the next plan. Adam Weishaupt had finished the World Revolutionary Plan May the 1st, 1776. And to make sure it worked, the dialectic was the Constitution of the United States drawn up by the Founding Fathers. Some of them were honest, others were mostly Masons, and it was designed to counter the coronation oath of the Queen in order to foment a war. They wanted a war. They wanted to fight in order to put us under economic bondage. That was the whole purpose of it. But some of the Founding Fathers were not aware of this. They were Masons. They were infiltrated by the Jacobins. But they did succumb, as most congressmen do. Or they die, or fired, or whatever. The honest ones were put out of the way, or threatened. Or they followed that silly blood oath and were loyal to their brothers, which is ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. But that's what they did. So consequently, we have the Revolutionary War. That should have been done in other ways and would have worked, but not by violence. We've been lied to in the history books. And nevertheless, let's move on. So, they formed the Rothschilds, not only the sugar industry, but also the slave industry. They went to Africa, and they set up on purpose slavery in the South, by design, only in the South, in order to foment, 60-some years later, their planned civil war. They were going to use slavery as the trigger, fight for freedom as the call. On the surface, both the North and the South had no clue. The boys died for nothing. They died because they thought they were fighting for freedom and for their homeland, the South versus the North, and so forth. Lincoln was not a good guy. Lincoln was half Rothschild. He was half Rothschild. But he became a good guy just like JFK did later. It's almost a parallel. It's quite remarkable how their lives and their administration parallels. Quite amazing if you look at it. But Lincoln came around toward the end of the war. That's why the Jesuits assassinated Lincoln and the Masons. He went outside the family, would not take the loans at 33% interest, which would put America in the worst position. But it still did it. He was going to do similar goals as JFK was going to do, to break the bondage of the Illuminati. Nevertheless, they had slavery throughout to put at least into a generation of the South, so they get used to it. It would become a way of life. And then what you do is you remove that way of life and you change it, thereby causing war. That was the purpose of it. So after the Civil War, and I'm really cutting this short, I could really talk an hour for this, but after the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, give them freedom. Can't they call us Declaration of Independence? Fight for freedom? Yeah, well, not entirely. How about the Indians? How about the Mexicans? How about the blacks? They weren't free. Okay, that's another story. Anyways, then they started the subjugation of the blacks and the women. Oh yeah, women's places in the home, making babies and cooking. You can't smoke. You can't vote. You think that was by accident? No. You think it foment the division of the family in line with the humanist agenda and the 5-step program that I wrote you a little while ago. Divide the family, you divide the country. That's a rule, that's a strategy, a dialectic. So, throughout the 1800s, at the end of them, early 1900s, you saw what they did to the blacks. What is wrong with people these days? Put them in ghettos, they portrayed them in plays and movies and made them look silly and stupid and on purpose. And in the South, eating one place and whites eating another. What's wrong with people back then? They thought it was part of the culture. It was subjugation and a plan on a much, much bigger scale. And all the players on the lower levels had no idea they were being used. When the time finally came, the Rockefellers funded the feminist movement. It's time now to separate the wife from the family. Separate the families. It worked wonderfully. And now it's time for the civil rights movement. Yeah, well, of course, no joke. But on a higher level, the Boulay Society, Prince Hall affiliation of the blacks and the Masons, and the Freemasons on the white side, and the Jesuits said now it's time to start the Civil War, because in 1960 they had planned a world war a little ahead of time. It was not supposed to occur then, in accordance with Albert Pike's plans for World War III. Are you starting to fill in the blanks here? So the Civil Rights Movement was an effort to get us busy in the riots and in the racial strife, so they could, in the background, form World War III and subjugate us under a dictatorship a little ahead of schedule. And they were warned not to by the European progressives. But the U.S. Illuminati was jumping ahead of the game of the worldwide revolutionary plan. It was too soon. The Kennedy family are Illuminati. But the Joseph Kennedy, JFK, they went against, in many different ways, went against the Illuminati plan. The Astors did, and they sunk the Titanic. That's another story. You know the story of JFK, and the Jesuits, Masons took him out, no doubt, Mafia, CIA, all worked together, all the same thing. Martin Luther King was a Boulay Society member, Prince Hall affiliation. He was a communist, a socialist. He changed. God got a hold of him. Something did. He became a great man, one of the greatest men in our entire history. JFK finally did. Malcolm X is another one. If you look at his quotes after he returned from the Middle East, he was a great American. Oh yeah. This racial strife would blind you to think he's not. He was. They were going to use the black Muslims as a trigger to start the riots and fight. And the KKK was going to do the white side, and the Black Panthers were going to do the black side, and we were going to have a civil war and marches, and Martin Luther King saw this. He was torn between doing the marches and knowing that the riots would be forming and not doing them, which he knew he had a problem with that, but of course he went through with the marches, but he was going through this strife of himself because he knew that in the background there was those in the civil rights movement that were leaders were trying to start a war, a civil war. He knew in his last speech, he knew he was going to die because he was warned not to do this. But he did it anyway, despite the threats. JFK did too. He saw what happened. They knew that Bobby Kennedy would have defeated Nixon, who was a Mason, and he was supposed to do the third attempt at a dictatorship. Oh yeah, 1972-74. Watergate was a symptom of that. Nixon failed for several reasons. One was they couldn't trust the U.S. military to fire on American citizens. Two, They knew that Islam was going to be a problem. They had to subjugate and go after Islam. Even though the Vatican had formed the Muslim Brotherhood, oh yeah, it sure did. 2023, the Vatican formed the radical Muslim Brotherhood, jihadist. Himmler. Look up Himmler. In the 1920s, they formed the Muslim Brotherhood. You see how controlled this is? And how we're so conditioned to believe otherwise in these history books. And it can easily be refuted, but nobody challenges them. Some of us do. It's all contrived, all set up, all pre-planned. The only hiccups was the Western progressives, that'd be us, jumping ahead of the plans of the black nobility and the priesthood. Because the Third World War was planned by Albert Pike to take place between Islam and the Jews in Israel. He planned this in 1871. It's to fake the Armageddon. You sort of see this taking shape. You can see the end times coming. And this is planned by Lucifer, giving it to the world servers. The Black Pope, the Society of Jesus leader of the Jesuits, who tells the White Pope what to do. The priesthood tells Queen Elizabeth what to do. I can just go on and on about this. It's really mind-boggling sometimes, but there is a rhyme to this reason. And there is an agenda that would blow your mind if you knew